Caseworkers are stretched thin, balancing high caseloads and endless paperwork. But with SpeakRight, documentation doesn't have to mean burnout. SpeakRight's Protective Services transcription cuts paperwork time dramatically, so you can meet deadlines, reduce overtime, and focus on what truly matters, the families you serve. With SpeakRight's free mobile app and desktop platform, caseworkers can capture detailed narratives anytime, anywhere, with just one tap to upload. SpeakRight is proven to lower stress and turnover, helping agencies retain dedicated staff while improving case quality. Don't let documentation slow you down. Let SpeakRight do the heavy lifting. Visit speakright.com/imprint to see how SpeakRight can transform your agency today. That's SpeakRight, SpeakWrite.com/imprint.
Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the Safe Camp Audio Network. You can check out our show page and all of Safe Camp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on social media. On today's episode, we are joined by Rita Soronen, CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, which in full disclosure is a funder of our parent organization, Fostering Media Connections. But the foundation's main project is Wendy's Wonderful Kids, which is a decades-long push to improve America's performance when it comes to finding permanence for older youth in foster care. Sadly, older youth in that statement refers to 9-year-olds and above, because the research shows us that at the ripe old age of 8, it is increasingly difficult to find a permanency path into adoption or guardianship for young children in foster care. Now, Wendy's Wonderful Kid just recorded its 15,000th adoption. Soronen joined us at the 10,000 mark a few years back, so I figured I'd have her on to reflect on the next milestone they've unlocked, and since quite a bit has changed in child welfare in that time in between. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Rita Soronen. All right, almost 4 years ago to the day, we had Rita Soronen of the Dave Thomas Foundation on Adoption on to talk about the 10,000th adoption recorded through the foundation's Wendy's Wonderful Kids program. So when I heard that they had just crossed the 15,000 mark, felt like the right time to have Rita back on to talk about what's new with the program, how adoption has changed in these past few years and her time with Dave Thomas and more. So Rita, thanks for joining us again on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
John, it is great to be back. I can't believe 4 years have gone so quickly.
4 years.
But yeah, it's always good to talk to you.
I went ahead and did you a favor, went back to that to see what you had cited as the favorite, because you know the house rules here. We got to start with that before we get to the serious talks that we have. You chose just British criminal procedural TV in general. You just basically recommended Acorn TV to me, which actually was very helpful at the time because I started to watch it more. But I'll give you the categories again. You got to hit me with something in the vein of TV or movie, musical group, or sports team, or book. I think I missed that. So music, movie, TV, book, sports team. What do you got for the people, Rita?
Wow, you know, I'm probably one of the general population that loves some of these streaming shows. Ted Lasso, love it, just loved it. But you know, and I'm savoring White Lotus, the new season of White Lotus, savoring that for when we go on vacation in a couple of weeks. We're just going to dive into it. So
nice.
The streaming stuff, I like to just empty my brain and enjoy life a little bit.
Very nice. I feel like I'd be remiss not to ask this of somebody at Dave Thomas. What's your go-to Wendy's order?
Oh, well, my go-to Wendy's order is always, you know, when I've had it for the day, I drive through and I get a Diet Coke and a large fry.
The fries are good. I go, very rare for me, usually when I'm driving. You know, the highways in Ohio are chock full of them. Son of Baconator, some fries, and if I'm feeling bad, get a little Frosty, dip the fries in the Frosty. That's the move. That's the
Exactly.
move.
That's exactly it.
That's
Yeah.
the
I
move.
figure by the time I down a large fry, I've had enough.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start with some re-explaining, because I don't think we should assume that anybody listening to this knows everything about Wendy's Wonderful Kids and any of that. So, the foundation launched it as a program in 2004 as this strategic solution to kind of a problem that had become clear in data and anecdote at that point, which is that when adoption becomes the permanency goal for a child who's in foster care, it is much harder to find that permanency for an older youth in foster care in particular than it is for younger. And one of the more tragic realities about child welfare is when you say older versus younger, we're talking about like 8. We're not talking about older kid, like really old kids or anything like that. So maybe you can just explain the idea of Wendy's Wonderful Kids and how you have come to know that it's effective in addressing the barrier I just described.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really started pre-2004. It felt like we weren't filling the space in a way that we should. We were doing good awareness campaigns and alerting people to the notion that children were in foster care waiting to be adopted. But we were still seeing that number of about 20,000 children year over year were aging out of foster care. And we began to ask agencies that we were funding, why is it that children are aging out if your job is to get them to permanency? And we heard what we probably would still hear today. We don't have either the time to focus on them because we're triaging, bringing kids into the system and getting all of the pieces of what needs to happen done. And we don't have the resources to focus on them. If a 16-year-old has been placed in care for a couple of years and everything's stable, we're not going to upset that steady placement. Let's keep focusing back where we are. So we said, yes, but your job is to find permanency for these children. So we then began to look at what were the emerging best practices or what were the existing evidence-based practices to focus on what we called that population of children most likely to age out of care. You're right. Children age 9 and older, we know research shows that's sort of the ticker point when kids are less likely to be adopted. Children in sibling groups, children with special needs, and children who have been in care for so long, they resist efforts at permanency. They say no thank you to a judge when they ask if they want to be adopted. And there were no evidence-based programs. There were a lot at that time of sort of public programs, public displays of children, websites, adoption fairs that felt good when they worked, but we didn't really pay attention to those kids when they didn't work. So we pulled together some bits and pieces from existing best practices, called it a child-focused recruitment model, and launched it in 7 pilot sites in 2004. Well, and what we said is we'll give a grant money to an organization to hire a full-time adoption professional who will focus on this caseload of children, but they have to carry a smaller caseload, 12 to 15 maximum. They have to do a deep dive into the child's history and case file to find probably already existing contacts, extended family members, people already known to the child. And then they have to stick with this child, develop a relationship, meet with them regularly, and stick with this child until permanency is formed. And we said, if this works, great, we're going to figure out how to expand it. If it doesn't, at least we tried. Well, we saw very quickly children turning from having lingered in care into permanent families. It's not rocket science. The reality is we were giving caseworkers the opportunity to do what they wanted to do that good social work, do that good forensic work on behalf of these kids and find them permanent families. And for us, permanency means 3 things: legal adoption, legal guardianship, or reunification. And that's built into this process as well for so many kids.
Do you feel like even just the way you just described that, the concept of adoption has changed significantly since you guys embarked on this journey? I mean, I think that there was probably a time when guardianship was viewed austerely from adoption, and now we're just thinking of these things as, permanency through connection generally.
Absolutely. When we first thought of it, we're the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. That was in 1992 when Dave Thomas formed this organization. That was what people thought of for permanency, was legal adoption. They weren't, and the guardianship and extended kin family relationships really wasn't formally part of the conversation. And that notion of reunification or reinstatement of parental rights was rare, if ever, happening. So I think, there's been a change in that sense of what do we mean by permanency for children. But the vast majority of the kids that find permanency through Wendy's Wonderful Kids is through legal adoption still. But the others are certainly a component of it and a growing component of it. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we began to grow that program. We found the resources. We call it Wendy's Wonderful Kids because we went to our Wendy's partners, our franchisees, and said, if you do some more of that in-restaurant campaign fundraising from customers, we can dedicate those dollars to getting kids in your state and your community moving to permanency. And they jumped in a big way. So we recognized it by calling it the brand of Wendy's Wonderful Kids, but the model is child-focused recruitment. It grew very quickly because we were giving people the opportunity to do the job that they wanted and could do, but we knew it wasn't enough. It couldn't be another untested, non-evidence-based program in our mind. And so we looked at how can we do a rigorous evaluation. And by 2007, we had enough children involved in the program and enough states involved in the program that we put in place a rigorous impact evaluation comparing Wendy's Wonderful Kids against business as usual in the same jurisdictions in like 27 states, I think it was. I can't remember. And what we found at the end of 5 years, when we released that research in 2011, is that it doesn't move it just a little bit. It moves the needle significantly. That children adopted or children that go through this program and are served by Wendy's Wonderful Kids are up to 3 times more likely to move to permanency. And for children with particular specific mental health issues, more than 3 times more likely to be adopted. That put us on a journey of, okay, now we know it works. We've got to be able to offer this to any child that could benefit from the intervention. And that's when we went on this journey of how do we find additional resources to take this program to scale, but significantly to engage a public-private partnership. It can't just be philanthropic dollars. These children are in the custody of the state, in the custody of the county. There are federal and state funding that can accommodate this model in order to take it to scale. In other words, have enough of these recruiters in place in a state that every child that could benefit from this intervention has someone on their behalf. And that's where we are. We're now scaled or scaling in 19 states and 1 province in Canada.
Yeah, I saw that you guys are up to like full scale in Ontario.
Yeah,
what's the difference been between doing that in Canada versus the US?
So they, in Canada, or at least in Ontario, they work through the Children's Aid Societies exclusively, at least for this relationship. And so that's managed very much by the province and who gets what access to funds. Of course, with all of the work on Indigenous rights and the transition to making sure that children stay with their families, their culture of origin, there have been fewer kids that are moving into the system in Ontario. So and it's gone through significant and frequent administrative changes in the province, but we've endured and have been working with the province since 2014, I think. I can't remember. Yes, it's been a while.
So Rita mentions that they have been scaling Wendy's Wonderful Kids. A big wind in the sail of that came when Blue Meridian Partners made Wendy's Wonderful Kids one of the first kind of, I always call them like the big bets of child welfare, really not just child welfare, but this was, I believe, at least an initial investment, $200 million over a very long period of time in each of, I think it was you guys and maybe like 4 other groups at the time or 3 other groups to really take something that, had that strong imprimatur of evidence and see, can you take this to a national level, right? I feel like it's fair to say if you had not had that impact study, no chance you get that investment, right? You're
right. It would have been a lesser chance. Prior to that engagement with the Blue Meridian Partners, we had taken the program to scale in Ohio. So in 2012, and we began with Blue Meridian Partnership in 2017, we approached the state of Ohio as soon as the research came out. We had been providing private funds for, I can't remember, 7 or 8 recruiters across the state. We knew it could benefit from many more. And so we talked to the state. We engaged then in a public-private partnership that has endured and, in fact, increased from 2012 forward in Ohio. So that gave that more justification to, I think, Blue Meridian Partners that said, well, you've already scaled in a state. You've got the research. You've put this through testing since 2004. It's probably a safe big bet on their part. But you're right. It was that infusion of funds that allowed us to have different kinds of conversations with states. Philanthropy was much bigger at the table than it was with the state of Ohio.
Sure. Right. So we'll talk a little more scaling in a minute. As wonky as that is, I think it's really important for people to hear because that's everybody's dream, right? So, 2004 is the pilot. I know it was like being built before that, but just let's do this simple math here. It took you 17 years to get to 10,000 adoptions.
I know.
Took 5 years to get to 15,000. which means, right, that the pace of Wendy's Wonderful Kids is greatly quickened. And I would say that's the good news. I don't know that this is necessarily bad news, but I remember reporting on, as you guys kind of embarked on Blue Meridian, that the goals that you had kind of set were get to like 2,500 workers around the country, something like that, get to 58,000 adoptions. Now, to be fair, that's by 2028. We're not there yet. But obviously that would, you'd have to hit like 15K every year until then. But it also strikes me that there's a lot of fundamentals around children awaiting adoption that have changed in that time. So looking back, how do you feel about that goal? What do you think is reasonable as you keep going down the scaling process? Like, how do you think about all that stuff?
Well, I think our mistake in our early excitement of scaling with the Blue Meridian partners was forgetting that it takes time. First, if you're going to hire 40 recruiters in a state, it takes some time to get those recruiters in place, to get them trained, to get caseloads filled, and then that process of time that it takes to get to know the child and move them to permanency. So, 18 months, 12 to 18 months for that first step already put us way behind what we thought would be an accelerated schedule of, get them in and get them adopted. That was our mistake. That was our naivete, of quickness of action. There's also that sense that, quicker isn't always better. These are kids that have been in care for so long. We want to make sure that this is the right place for them to move. We want to make sure that this is where they want to go, that we have their trust and they have our trust to make this happen, and the trust of the family stepping forward. And sometimes that takes a little longer than what if it's a required 6-month wait with a state or something like that. So these aren't the kind of things that can move quickly. And therefore, those calculations, I think that's, we also want to be scaled in all 50 states and DC by 2028. I'm still holding to that goal, but that time is flying quick, right? Not every state is interested in this conversation.
You're at 18 states now, right?
19,
that are fully scaled. 19 states fully scaled. Yeah. And there's got like maybe a handful of states that don't have any recruiters. There's like just a few states.
There's just a couple. I can't remember who they are right now. They used to. They have one too. Yeah. And, there are those large states like California that it's going to take an outsized financial commitment to scale the state, even Los Angeles, an outsized commitment. So we've had conversations back and forth, but we haven't had the ability to seal a deal yet in some of those very large states where those numbers are significantly more profound than Massachusetts, where we're scaling, for example. So it's a matter of which states as well to drive those numbers, as well as the time factor of moving kids to permanency.
I hadn't really factored that. Actually, as I was kind of preparing to talk to you about all this, I hadn't really thought about just simply which states get in on the idea or buy into that idea of scaling when matters. Because you're right. I mean, California, even if they were sort of not the most energetic about scaling, but were in the pipeline, that's just an enormous number of kids versus any other 5 states you wanted to put together. I was actually thinking about it more from the simple fact that I think the numbers would back me up here, that just simply the number of kids waiting for adoption is lower. It's just lower than when you said that, right?
When we were planning and went through a year of strategic planning with the Blue Meridian partnership prior to turning the lights on in 2017, they were looking at AFCAR's numbers to drive these metrics in 2016, which was already, a year and a half or 2 years in arrears. So we were looking at numbers that weren't responsive to a 5-year plan, that first part, never mind now as we're moving forward, looking at what the real numbers are and what the potential is. So I think, look, we continue to grow. We've got I can't say which state, but we've got a tacit agreement with the state now. We're just waiting to sign a contract. We've got new energy in a couple of states we've been approaching for some time. Don't know what the current environment will do to either elevate or perhaps impede those conversations, but we're still hopeful that states understand that here's a proven program. It works. There's a social return on investment and an actual return on investment. When you look at this, we know it's for every dollar spent in Ohio, $3 are saved. We just did another one of those for the state of Texas. It's about $2.50 are saved for every dollar. So we know all the things are right that legislators should respond to. It's just making sure that we can get all the parties engaged in this is the right change management conversation.
Today's episode is powered by Listen. a groundbreaking AI platform transforming how child welfare and other public sector providers learn and grow. Imagine being able to roll out comprehensive, secure training and quality monitoring across your entire organization instantly. That's exactly what Listen delivers to over 70 public and private sector clients. Developed by PhD academic psychologists, Listen helps health and human services agencies master motivational interviewing and other evidence-based practices. And this isn't just another training tool. It's backed by 16 years of rigorous research and peer-reviewed studies. To learn more, visit listen.io. That's lyssn.io. lyssn.io, or follow the link in the show notes.
What would you say, looking back on the last couple of years, maybe the last 10 years, you guys have learned about the process of scaling? Like, what lessons have you learned, and what are sort of the unforeseen challenges, that you've experienced along the way here?
Yeah, one of our biggest lessons, and we learned it when we engaged with the state of Texas, was we can't just say that it's the Dave Thomas Foundation coming in and helping you and partnering with you. We have to create real alliances, real partnerships within the state, because we're outsiders. We've got a program, a proven program, but we're still outsiders in the state. And we realized that with Texas when we began to work with the Texas Alliance for Children and Family Services, the umbrella organization for all of the child welfare organizations in the state. At the same time, the state was converting to a privatized system and moving toward community-based care. And so having developed that partnership, and I think creating a trust relationship at a much different level than we could have if we were just marching in on our own and saying, well, the governor wants this, or the child welfare director wants this, the community wants this. We're now scaling as they move into their community-based care regions in Texas. And it's working wonderfully in a large state that we might have had challenges with otherwise. So we learned that lesson very quickly. Create as many partnerships as possible. We don't have to do this alone. And those partnerships help when you have to go back to the legislature and say, now this needs to get embedded in the budget. And we've got allies to help us do that. We had 1 or 2 or 3 organizations that we're working with, and they may not be the loudest or most powerful voices in the state. And so finding where that advocacy voice exists and power numbers makes that happen, so that the Texas Alliance is a large group of smaller organizations. And I think that's the other lesson. It doesn't matter what's successful in one state, it doesn't necessarily translate into another. And so really doing a deep dive into who are the power players, what are the nuances that we need to know, where are the challenges that we need to know ahead of time so we don't stick our feet in it in a way that we hadn't thought about initially. We had to learn all of that and are still learning that with some of the states that we're approaching. Yeah.
A more metaphysical question on the same topic. What's harder, establishing a new presence or getting Wendy's Wonderful Kids to stick somewhere? Maybe talk a little bit about what's been effective in both pots.
It's a great question, because we were really wildly successful exceeding all of our milestone goals for the Blue Meridian Partnership early on. We still are, make no mistake. But it felt easier to do those initial, let's create a new partnership. Everybody's excited. But what happens 5 years down the road when the contracts the contracts are built for the majority of them so that a majority of the initial funding is philanthropic, a small part is state-based, and then over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, that shifts so that the majority share of the cost lays with the state or the county. So in 2020, they might say, great, this looks great, but you've got a whole different administration in 2024 as you're beginning to negotiate the 2025 contract, and they're like, what? We have to pay this kind of money? And so that sustainability is probably going to be the harder part than the initial conversation. Once we're in a door that people want to open for us, it's maintaining that you've got to embed this like Ohio has. You've got to embed it in your budget. You've got to embed it as best practice. And we've learned a lot about how to move that direction in a way that we weren't really skilled at in 2017.
So you have been doing this for a long time. Not to date you here. Rita looks just as young as when I met her many years ago.
Yeah.
You joined Dave Thomas just after the passage of the Adoption and Safe Families Act, right? 2000. So, while it was certainly an accelerator of sorts for the practice of domestic adoption from foster care, certainly its legacy is much debated now and somewhat controversial. But let's set that aside. I didn't want to ask you this specifically in the context of ASFA. Just curious, give you some leeway to just kind of ruminate here. But what has changed about the nature of adoption, the practices around it, the cultural implications of it from that time when you were just first entering the space? And I say that knowing, Rita did not walk in from like corporate America. She had been working in the child welfare space before that. But, what's changed big picture around you guys as you've been doing this work,
I mean, obviously, the newfound emphasis on prevention, of keeping children with families, of providing families the kinds of resources that they may need, and so they don't have to go into the foster care system. That was not a conversation in 2001. It just wasn't. It was judgment-based. Get kids out of these unsafe homes. And that whole dynamic of poverty versus neglect wasn't a robust conversation. So that's something that is, they're all good conversations. We absolutely need them. The newer one is, termination of parental rights. Do we need to put limits on termination of parental rights? Or what are the circumstances? Or what are the state laws that do surround TPRing children? And should we even be doing it? New conversations. The whole, in a way, the politicization. Yeah. I don't know why I can't say it. Of child welfare. Right. We never saw that. It was, typically parties coming together, House and Senate coming together. Ultimately, yeah, there was a lot of teeth gnashing during ASFA and other pieces of legislation, but ultimately coming together because of the environment that we've been in the past few years. There is and again, justifiably so, this notion of who are we putting in foster care and why are we doing it? Is it an over-policing? Is it a reaction to poverty rather than true neglect? And if it isn't, or if it is, what are we doing to counteract that? How are we supporting families rather than pulling them into complex systems that the kids may never get out of? So those are huge and important and meaningful conversations that we weren't grappling with in 2017 and 2004 when this was created.
Yeah. One thing that has also we've gained, it's gained attention. I think we should start to see more consistent data about this sometime soon, is the disruption and dissolution of adoptions once they've happened. USA Today did a pretty data-driven investigation into this. I think you could take a lot from that investigation. One thing, on a big macro level, I'd say it was somewhat good news that it's pretty infrequent when you just look at across the table of adoptions. More concerning is that, and this is close to home for you guys, it's much more frequent as an occurrence for youth who are adopted at older ages. And then I think the most insidious challenge that it really brought up for me, that series, was the sort of ticking time bomb nature of disruption. Like, we do so much to measure, is this thing working, by looking a year out, 2 years out. And what that really made clear was, the issues that bring about a disruption in adoption happen many years later, often, right? And that's really hard from a systemic reactive point of view to just like figure out what to do. Now, I know at the time of the impact study that you guys did on Wendy's Wonderful Kid, this was not really something that was like focused on. I know they looked a little bit at pre-adoptive and how that was going, but is this something since that you have examined kind of within your guys' own work? Is there even a viable way to track disruption just in the constellation of Wendy's Wonderful Kids?
It's a great conversation, and we did a very small survey. We don't. It's on our website, but we don't push it out because it was so small that I want to do a much bigger one of older youth who were adopted through Wendy's Wonderful Kids. Did the adoption stick? And we measured some, and this was through Child Trends, again, the group that did our original evaluation. So we didn't do it. What are their issues of well-being and how are they faring? The reality was, again, it was really small. It was, I think, 200 and some kids. the reality, and they're hard to, that's the problem. We don't have any, it's hard to find these kids at age 25 or 28 or 30. None of the adoptions had fallen apart. And on average, they were doing fairly well. They had access to health care. They were going to school. They may not still be living with their family, but then they were 21, 22, 23. So most kids aren't at that age. And interestingly, though, one of the big takeaways was they really wanted to be and were connected with extended family members that did not adopt them. And that may have been one of those factors that kept that relationship intact. We're not sure. So it's a small study. Yes, we want to do a bigger one, but we're also, by strategy now, we just put this into our business plan last year, is we're also beginning to look at post-permanency resources for families that go through the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program. And so right now we've got I think we're funding 10, sites, and we're trying to discover where are the existing best practices for post-permanency, which ones are evidence-based, if at all, where can we elevate those practices, and then how do we weave those in? So these are all organizations that are associated through Wendy's Wonderful Kids right now. How do we ultimately weave those best practices for post-permanency dynamics or strategies or tactics into a family that's going through Wendy's Wonderful Kids, so that before an adoption is finalized, before a reunification happens, they're keenly aware of acts of resources in their community that they can reach out to, or have already made those connections, so it doesn't feel like a risk to do it post-permanency, so that a parent doesn't feel like a failure, or the child doesn't feel like, I don't know where to go. So we're just at the beginning stages of it, John, but I think it's the next wave of how do we assure that the work we're doing with Wendy's Wonderful Kids is doing the best possible for these families, and specifically for these kids as well.
On that topic of post adoption services and what families need once you help put them together, you have access to all these workers who are intensely in these conversations. What's your sense? I'm assuming you guys do some level of surveying workers, engaging what they're hearing out there. I guess what I want to know, what I'm curious about is what are the most frequent kind of leaner issues? You know what I mean? Where it's I want to do this, but X, what does it tend to be? I don't know about raising a teenager. Is it financial? Is it what? What is the one that bubbles up to you?
The financial one bubbles up a lot. The kid has resources through foster care and may have extended resources through foster care that I won't get as an adoptive parent, or I just can't possibly afford to do the following. But I think the other one is, can this child, that's why the predominant tactic, and I'm sorry, I'm backing up a little bit, but the predominant tactic of the Wendy's Wonderful Kids model is reach out to extended family members or people already known to the child, so that they will already know where are the circling issues perhaps around this child. It's not going to be a surprise to them. They're not going to wake up one day and well, what's this behavior? They already know this child. So I think some of those concerns about, will this child fit into my family? Can we really mesh as a unit when this child has gone through so much that I don't know about? The model says know about that, already know about it, so that it eliminates that piece. So I think the predominant one probably is financial, and what do I do if something, I don't know where to go if something does happen, if the child isn't happy suddenly, or is presenting the impact of trauma and extended trauma that I didn't realize, and it didn't surface until 2 years after the adoption was finalized.
Right. So you reached 15,000 adoptions right around 2025, a little before it. Yeah. You've got the big bet that will, eventually that will wind down. Where is Dave Thomas? Where is the Wendy's Wonderful Kids? Where do you see things in 2030, 5 years from now? What are your aspirations? I'm sure you play. I know you enough to know that you already began planning for that phase of the organization and your own career, probably. So, give us that 5-year window.
Well, I think that we will be scaled in every state that we can possibly scale in. And there may be some outliers that we just don't get to, but we'll have the vast majority of states scaled. But more importantly than scaled, it will be embedded as business as usual in those states, so that it may be that it's a handoff. that we see that you've got it in the budget, you've got people trained, and this is what everybody's comfortable with doing for this population of children until some better tactic comes along. And it's been a lot of years and no better tactic has come along. But also that there is that tightly woven post-permanency strategy with all of those states and all of those kids as well. And that's going to take some significant funding on our part. We don't have a Blue Meridian that's going to fund post-permanency strategies. But that internally, we've gone through significant growth. Look, when I started, we were a staff of 5, I think. We're up to 73 today, I believe. So, that managing that internal growth so that I have a staff that feels supported and happy and they've got career paths within the organization, or they've got career development so that when they move on, they feel good about their time at the foundation. Mm-hmm. That's as equally important to me now that I wasn't thinking about 15 years ago, as it is that we serve the children that we've said we're going to serve in the best possible ways. I think it's those two forces. When I leave someday, I've been here a long time. It's going to be somebody else's turn someday. Is it in the best possible shape to continue to do more better, than I could possibly imagine?
I certainly don't expect that to happen anytime really soon. But as somebody who's been there 25 years, I mean, yeah, I would imagine. So how do you think about that? What do you do to plan for succession? That's a long time with one leader.
Yeah, it is. And I'm keenly aware I'm not the founder, but I'm it feels like I was. I'm keenly aware of founder syndrome with organizations. That's the last thing we want to do. Had conversations with my board. Certainly, I've built the best possible leadership team that I can. And we've focused this year in particular on career leveling up and down the organization so that the senior leadership team has succession within their teams as well. We've spent a lot of time on assuring the viability and the sustainability of this organization, because unfortunately, this is not a conversation. We may have fewer kids in care, but we're still going to have children that need policy and practice and attitudes that support their movement to permanency.
Rita Soronen, Dave Thomas Foundation on Adoption. Thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly podcast.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks to Rita Soronen of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption for joining us today. And thanks to SpeakRight for being the lead sponsor of this week's episode. The Imprint Weekly podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or at safecampaudio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko, with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you'd consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is very easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews, and just visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can get us over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.